Hello everyone and welcome back to Panik Peak. Let me know where you are listening from in the world by leaving a comment, and if you like the episode, please like and subscribe. Now, let's get cozy, and let's begin. I never should have scheduled that appointment. I thought it would be routine, a quick checkup, maybe a few tests, and then I'd be on my way. But as the minutes stretched into hours and the sterile white walls of the exam room seemed to close in around me, I began to feel something was terribly wrong. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears, louder than the ticking of the clock, louder than the buzz of the flickering fluorescent light above. There was an oppressive weight in the air, something suffocating, as if I were waiting for something, or someone, that would never arrive. But when the door finally opened, it wasn't the doctor who stepped in. It was me. And I realized too late that this appointment was not what it seemed, and I would never leave. I checked my watch again. The doctor said it would only take a few minutes, but I've been sitting in this sterile, too bright exam room for hours. The walls are a dull shade of beige, the kind that absorbs sound and hope. I shift in my seat, the paper sheet on the exam table crinkling under me. The fluorescent light above flickers, buzzing like a trapped fly. The clock on the wall ticks steadily, but something is off. My eyes fixate on the second hand. It hesitates, jumps, then starts moving backward. A cold unease spreads through my chest. I glance at my watch. 3:42 p.m. The clock on the wall says 3:41. Then 3:40. My pulse quickens. I press my palms against the table to ground myself. Breathe. It's just a broken clock. But the walls seem closer now, squeezing the air from the room. My breath is shallow, my skin clammy. The door handle rattles, and relief washes over me. Finally, the doctor. The door swings open. A man in a white coat steps in, clipboard in hand. I start to greet him, but my throat closes when I see his face. It's mine. My own eyes stare back at me from a face I know too well. But there's something wrong. The expression is empty, mechanical. My doppelganger's lips curl into a slow, clinical smile. "Let's begin," he says, his voice identical to mine. I scramble off the table, my knees nearly buckling. "Who? What?" My voice shakes. The doctor, that thing, tilts its head. "You've been here before, haven't you?" I shake my head violently. No. No, I haven't. He steps closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. It feels real. Too real. "Let me show you." The walls pulse, shifting, melting. The fluorescent light above flares painfully bright, then plunges the room into darkness. A single, sickly light flickers on above the exam table. I'm strapped to it. My breath comes in ragged gasps. The restraints cut into my wrists. I thrash, but it's useless. My twin looms over me, adjusting a syringe filled with a black, viscous liquid. "You always forget," he murmurs. "But we do this every time." The needle sinks into my arm, and a searing cold spreads through my veins. My vision darkens at the edges. The last thing I hear before everything fades is my own voice whispering, "See you again soon." I wake to the sound of my own heartbeat, thudding in my ears. The pain is sharp, searing through my limbs as I sit up. The room is dark, save for a single light hanging overhead, dim and sickly. The air is thick, musty. The walls are the same beige, but they look older now. Like they've been here for much longer than I remember. I try to stand, but my legs feel like rubber. I stumble, but catch myself on the edge of the exam table, my fingers brushing against the crinkled paper. The coldness of it sends a shiver down my spine. "You're awake," says a voice. I freeze. It's my voice. My own voice, as cold and indifferent as before. I turn slowly. There he is, my twin. His eyes gleam with an eerie light as he stands by the door, watching me. There's no warmth, no humanity in them. Just emptiness. "You." I begin, but my throat is dry. The words stick. "Shoo," he says, holding up a finger to his lips. "You don't need to speak. I know what you're going to ask. And I'm going to show you." Before I can react, he snaps his fingers. The room around me shudders, and the walls pulse, bending, as if the very structure of the place is alive. The light flickers again, a harsh, jagged pulse that makes my eyes ache. The clock on the wall is gone, replaced by a strange symbol, an intricate design that seems to warp and shift the longer I stare at it. I take a step back, trying to distance myself from the surreal shift in reality. "Every time," he says, stepping closer. "We do this every time. The cycle. The appointment. The forgetting." My heart skips a beat. "No. I haven't." "Yes, you have. It always starts the same." He leans in, his lips curling into a grin. "You come in for the appointment, you wait, and then I show you the truth." The truth? My mind races, trying to make sense of it, but the more I think, the foggier everything becomes. The weight in my chest grows heavier, my breath's coming faster. "This isn't real," I whisper, though I don't believe it. "This can't be happening." "It's happening," he replies, his tone like ice. "And it will keep happening, no matter how hard you try to escape. The moment you forget, it starts again." I lunge toward the door, but he blocks my way with ease, his hand grasping my arm with inhuman strength. "You can't leave," he says. "Not until you remember." I struggle, my heart pounding in my chest. But no matter how much I fight, no matter how desperately I try to break free, I can't shake the suffocating sense of inevitability. The cycle is never ending, and I am caught in it, helpless. Suddenly, the room tilts violently, as if the floor itself is trying to swallow me whole. The walls warp and twist, stretching impossibly far, until I'm falling, plummeting into a void that seems to have no end. The light from above flickers, and the darkness swallows me whole. I wake again, my head spinning, but I don't need to look around to know where I am. The cold, sterile air. The dull beige walls. The flickering light. The clock on the wall ticks backward. And I know, with sickening certainty, that the appointment is starting again. "Welcome back," my twin says, smiling as though we've done this 1,000 times before. "I can't escape. I never will." "See you again soon," he whispers. And the cycle begins again. Time is a cruel, unyielding thing. We like to think we have control over it, that we can bend it to our will, but in reality, it bends us. This place, this appointment, it is a reminder of that. A reminder that no matter how desperately I try to escape, no matter how many times I fight against it, I will never break free. I wonder now, if I am the doctor. If I am the one who keeps returning, repeating this cycle for reasons I cannot remember. If the true horror of this place isn't the never-ending nature of it, but the fact that I will forget, each time, the reality of what I've been through. I will forget that I was once someone else, someone free. And I will return, as I always do. The appointment never ends. It was just another routine appointment. I'd been putting it off for months, but the reminder came in the mail, the words in bold, "It's time for your dental cleaning." I couldn't avoid it any longer, so I made the call and scheduled the appointment. Routine. Simple. I had no idea how wrong that day would go. Dr. Klein, my usual dentist, greeted me with a firm handshake and a smile. He was always professional, always on time. Nothing ever stood out about him, except for the faint hum of his voice as he worked, something comforting, almost soothing in a way. I could have fallen asleep in that chair if it weren't for the strange, sharp instrument scraping and prodding at my teeth. He made small talk while he worked, something about his kids and a recent vacation. My mind wandered as he scraped at the plaque between my molars, a familiar, unpleasant feeling. The cool, metallic taste of the cleaning tools brushed against my tongue. The buzzing of the overhead lights filled the room, and all I could focus on was the feeling of him digging deeper, just a little too deeply. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. It was hard to tell. Time seemed to slow down, and the only thing I was aware of was the rhythmic scraping and the feeling of the tools tugging at my gums. I closed my eyes briefly, just for a moment, to escape it all, when I felt something off. A strange tingling sensation spread across my gums, starting from the back of my mouth and slowly crawling forward. At first, I thought it was just the sensation of being cleaned too aggressively, the way your mouth feels after a deep cleaning. But it was more than that. There was an itch, deep within the tissue, a feeling I couldn't shake. I opened my eyes, glancing up at Dr. Klein's focused expression. Something about the way he was working now felt different. More deliberate, as though he was taking extra care with each stroke of the tool. I swallowed, trying to ignore the discomfort that was steadily growing in my mouth, but it only worsened. The itching spread to my gums, then to the roots of my teeth, and I felt a dull ache radiate through my jaw. It wasn't pain, at least not the kind I was used to, but something much more unsettling. I tried to speak, but my mouth felt full, swollen, as though my gums were too tight against my teeth. Dr. Klein paused for a moment, looking down at me with a calm smile. "You're doing great. Almost finished." I nodded weakly, but the discomfort was unbearable. My jaw twitched involuntarily, and my teeth, they felt wrong. I tried to wiggle my tongue against one of my molars, but it felt loose. Too loose. Panic set in, but I didn't want to make a scene. Before I could say anything, the first tooth came loose. It happened so quickly that I didn't have time to react. It was as though it was suddenly no longer anchored to my jaw, just attached, and before I could stop it, it slipped out of place with a soft, wet pop. My breath caught in my throat, and I looked up at Dr. Klein, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "Is everything all right?" he asked, but his voice was distant, muffled, like I was hearing it underwater. I reached up to touch my mouth, feeling the gap where my tooth had been. The space felt unnatural. My heart began to race, the fear gnawing at me. "My tooth," I whispered, but before I could say more, another one fell out. It was a sharp, sudden sensation, a violent wrenching of something that had always been part of me, but now it was loose, free. The second tooth rolled to the back of my throat, and I gagged, reaching for the cup of water on the counter beside me. I leaned forward, spitting into the cup, my hands trembling. And then, I felt it. The third tooth. It wasn't like before, it didn't just fall out, it pushed itself free. A dull, gnawing pressure under my gums, as though something was shifting beneath the surface. Something was growing, and it wasn't just teeth. It was like my entire mouth was alive. My gums felt raw, burning. I tried to speak again, but now, my tongue was blocked. I could feel something wriggling beneath the skin, like tiny, frantic creatures clawing their way out. My mouth was no longer my own, it was a battleground, filled with things I couldn't control. I turned to Dr. Klein, but his eyes weren't on me anymore. He was focused on his tools, his hands moving like he was waiting for something to happen. Waiting for this moment. His expression was calm, almost pleased, as though he had been expecting it all along. "What's happening to me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. But Dr. Klein didn't answer. Instead, I felt another tooth pop free, falling from my gums and landing softly on the chair. I couldn't focus on it anymore. It was all happening too fast. I rushed to the bathroom down the hall, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I forced open the door. The mirror, thank God for the mirror, I had to see what was happening to me. I had to see if I was imagining it. I stared at my reflection, but what I saw wasn't my own face anymore. My lips were parted, and the once familiar outline of my teeth had disappeared, replaced with something wrong. My gums were swollen and red, the skin stretched tight, and within the space where my teeth had been, there was movement. Tiny hands. Chittering hands, each one barely the size of a fingernail, wriggled and twitched beneath my skin. Fingers pressed against the inside of my mouth, scraping, scratching, as if they were trying to escape. I recoiled, my hands flying to my face in horror, but the hands only moved faster, clawing their way out through the gum tissue. I opened my mouth wider, my stomach turning in sickening realization. The hands were alive. They were growing. Each one was small, delicate, with pale skin and sharp, spindly fingers that seemed to dance and twitch in excitement. They crawled across my gums, and I could feel their tiny movements deep within me. I choked, my throat tightening. I could feel them inside me, pushing, reaching for freedom. A dozen, no, more hands swarmed my mouth, pulling at my skin, crawling into the spaces where my teeth had once been. I tried to scream, but all that came out was a muffled, distorted gurgle. The tiny hands were everywhere. And then, through the haze of fear and panic, I heard it, chittering star. A tiny, frantic sound that echoed in my head, filling my ears. The hands weren't just in my mouth anymore. They were in my throat. In my jaw. Under my skin. I pressed my hand to my mouth, desperate to keep them inside, but they were relentless, tearing their way out, stretching my gums wider and wider. And through the mirror, I saw them. In the reflection, my mouth was full of hands. Tiny, wriggling hands, each one moving with a mind of its own. And then I felt it. One of the hands broke through the surface of my cheek. Sharp, jagged fingers scraped against my skin, and with a sickening pop, it broke free, crawling down my neck, disappearing into the shadows. I fell to my knees, gasping for air, feeling the hands push against every inch of my body. It wasn't just my mouth anymore. It was everywhere. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. Only the chittering. The horrible chittering, and the relentless crawling of tiny, greedy hands, each one eager to take their place in the world. And all I could do was wait. I don't know how long I knelt there, my hands clutching my face as the tiny hands continued to churn and twist beneath my skin. The chittering was maddening, like thousands of rats scrambling through the walls of my mind. My mouth, once a familiar place, was now a prison, and I could feel the last of my teeth being replaced, one by one, with these horrible, writhing things. But I couldn't stop it. I couldn't fight it. The worst part wasn't the pain, though there was pain, sharp and unbearable, like someone had taken a blade and was carving away at my very flesh. The worst part was the realization that it wasn't just my teeth being replaced. It was me. Something had been taken from me, something fundamental, and I couldn't get it back. As the last of my human teeth fell from my gums, I felt something shift inside me, something terrifying. The hands no longer just crawled. They controlled me. A force larger than my own mind took hold of me, guiding my every movement. My arms, my legs, everything felt distant, as though I was no longer the one in control of my body. I stood up, trembling. The reflection in the mirror didn't belong to me anymore. My mouth was now a hideous, chittering mass, full of tiny, grasping hands, each one reaching out, their claws flexing in an unnatural rhythm. They moved as if they had a mind of their own, a hive mind, and I was merely the vessel. It was then I realized the truth. This was never about the teeth. This was about collecting. Dr. Klein wasn't just a dentist. He was the tooth collector. He was taking more than teeth, he was taking souls. Every patient he had seen, every tooth he had pulled, every smile he had examined, he was building something. And now, I was part of it. I was one of many, just another body in the growing collection of those who had been consumed, who had been made into something less than human, something less than alive. I turned toward the door, the hands pushing against my lips, forcing me into motion. I had no choice. I wasn't in control anymore. But as I reached the door, a voice echoed in my mind, a voice that was not my own, yet strangely familiar. "You'll come back," it whispered. "They always do." I tried to scream, but all that escaped my mouth was a raspy, chittering sound. The door opened on its own, the hands pulling me forward, and as I stepped into the hallway, I knew that I wasn't leaving this place. I wasn't escaping. The tooth collector had claimed me. And now, I was part of the collection. The chittering grew louder, more insistent. There was no more fear, no more pain. There was only the dark, endless crawl of countless hands moving beneath my skin. And as I walked down the hall, I realized that I wasn't alone. There were others like me. We were all waiting. Waiting for the next appointment. The next victim. The next soul to be claimed. I always hated the dentist. The smell of antiseptic, the hum of machines, the too bright fluorescent lights, something about it always felt unnatural, clinical in a way that made my skin crawl. But this time, it's different. This time, I don't remember making an appointment. I don't remember coming here at all. Yet, here I am. A sharp, chemical tang lingers in the air. The overhead light glares into my eyes, a blinding halo of white. I squint against it, trying to lift a hand to block the glow. Nothing happens. A slow, creeping horror slithers through my chest. I try again. My arms won't move. My fingers won't twitch. My legs feel like dead weight. I'm paralyzed. My breathing quickens, sharp and ragged in my ears. My chest moves, so I'm not completely frozen. But my limbs, trapped. Restrained. The soft pressure around my wrists and ankles tells me there are straps holding me down. Then I hear them. A soft shuffle of feet. The scrape of metal against metal. Two figures move around me, clad in pale surgical gowns. Their faces are hidden behind sterile masks, but their eyes, dark, hollow, watch me with quiet intensity. The dentist and their assistant. But something is wrong. They don't speak. Not to me. Not to each other. No pleasantries, no questions about my day, no reassurances. They move in eerie unison, their motions smooth, practiced, silent. The dentist picks up an instrument from a metal tray. Their assistant watches, waiting for something unseen. Then, without a word, the dentist nods. A silent command. The assistant responds with a nod of their own. I try to ask what's happening, but my voice doesn't come. My mouth feels dry, my tongue thick and heavy. A whimper is all I can manage. The assistant moves closer. That's when I see it. Its skin, rubbery and too smooth, stretched too tight over its skull. Its mouth, wrong. The corners curl unnaturally, splitting its cheeks in a jagged grin. Its eyes, glass orbs, unblinking, reflecting my horror back at me. This thing isn't human. The whirring sound starts. The drill. The high-pitched screech pierces the silence, vibrating through the air. My heart pounds, slamming against my ribs like a trapped animal. The dentist tilts their head, watching me. There's something behind their eyes. Not curiosity. Not care. Anticipation. Like they've been waiting for this. I struggle against the restraints, but my body refuses to obey. I can't even flinch as the drill lowers, its shrieking growing louder, filling every corner of my skull. The assistant steps forward, pressing its two long fingers against my forehead, holding me in place. The pressure is unnatural, the strength behind it inhuman. The drill hovers over my face. Not toward my mouth. Toward my eye. No. No, no, no. I can't move. I can't scream. The whirring grows deafening, drowning out the sound of my own panicked breathing. Then the pain comes. A white-hot explosion of agony as the drill meets flesh, boring into my eye socket. My vision shatters, twisting into a kaleidoscope of blood and light. A sickening crunch vibrates through my skull. Something warm, thick and wet, dribbles down my temple. The whirring stops. I gasp, a strangled, choked sound, my chest heaving with silent sobs. My remaining eye blinks through the blur of tears and blood. The dentist and the assistant stand over me. They are smiling. The drill hums to life again. And I know, they aren't done. The pain is unbearable. My body convulses, useless against the straps. My vision fades in and out, darkness creeping at the edges of my mind like a curtain about to fall. I don't want to black out. I don't want to wake up again. But I do. A sharp, cold pressure lances through my skull, pulling me back from the abyss. The agony flares anew. I want to scream, beg, plead for it to stop, but my voice is still trapped inside me. Through the haze of my remaining eye, I see them moving again, working in eerie silence. The assistant, if it can even be called that, lifts something from the metal tray. A scalpel. I whimper. The dentist tilts their head, considering me, as if deciding where to cut next. My mind races, desperate, searching for any escape. Then, something shifts. A shadow flickers across the fluorescent light. A shape moves beyond the glass-paneled door at the far end of the room. Someone is coming. Hope surges through me like a shock of electricity. Asterisk, please, see me. Please, stop this. Please, help me, asterisk. The dentist and the assistant freeze. For a moment, they stand completely still, their heads angled toward the door. Then, as one, they turn back to me. The assistant raises one long, bony finger to its lips. Shoo. My stomach drops. The door creaks open. A figure steps inside. A man, dressed in a white coat, holding a clipboard. A real doctor. Relief floods me, hot and overwhelming. He looks up from his notes, glancing at the dentist, then at me. Our eyes meet. I try to cry out, to move, to do anything. But then he nods. Not to me. To them. And I realize, he isn't here to save me. The drill whirs to life again. I close my eye as the light above flickers one last time. Then, only darkness. I had been struggling with insomnia for months. My nights were endless, filled with tossing and turning, staring at the ceiling until the morning light finally filtered through the blinds. I visited my doctor, desperate for something that would bring me relief. After a few questions and a brief examination, he handed me a prescription for a new medication. This should help with your sleep issues, he said, his voice calm and reassuring. It's a new treatment, and it works wonders for people like you. Just make sure you follow the instructions carefully. The label on the bottle seemed normal at first glance. The usual warnings, don't drive, don't mix with alcohol, nothing that stood out. But there was one line that caught my attention, do not stop taking under any circumstances. I shrugged it off as a typical warning. Doctors had their protocols, and I wasn't one to question them. That night, I took the pill before bed, hoping for a peaceful sleep, hoping to finally get some rest. But that night, sleep never came the way I expected. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't even remember when my mind slipped into that soft, comforting haze. I just woke up, or at least I thought I did. But something was wrong. Something felt off. My eyes snapped open, but instead of the familiar comfort of my bedroom, everything was dark, too dark. The air felt heavier, colder. I tried to move, to stretch, but my body refused to obey. Panic rose in my chest as I realized I couldn't feel my limbs, couldn't wiggle my fingers or toes. I was trapped, my body, frozen in place. My mind screamed for me to wake up, to escape whatever nightmare I had slipped into. But nothing happened. My body stayed completely still, as though it were made of stone. I tried to scream, to make any noise at all, but my mouth wouldn't open. I was suffocating in silence. And then, I saw them. Shadows. At first, they were just shapes in the corners of the room, subtle and faint. But as my eyes adjusted, they began to grow. They started to move, no, crawl. They weren't just shadows, they were alive, writhing in the corners, inching closer and closer, pulling themselves along the walls and the floor. I couldn't look away. I felt their presence, the pull of something ancient and dark, something that didn't belong in the realm of the living. The room seemed to shrink, as if the darkness was pressing in on me, suffocating the light. The shadows grew more distinct, more tangible. They were no longer just formless blobs of darkness. Now, I could make out faces, twisted, hollow-eyed faces. Whispers filled the air. Low, guttural sounds that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. They were speaking, but in a language I almost understood. It was as though the words were on the edge of my comprehension, a feeling rather than clear speech. It sounded like something old, something ancient, and it clawed at my mind. The words circled my thoughts, sinking deep into my skull. You took the pill. The realization hit me like a gut punch. I had taken the pill. The new prescription my doctor had given me. The one with the warning. I felt the cold fingers of dread curl around my throat. Why hadn't I stopped? But I couldn't think. My body was still paralyzed, and my thoughts felt like they were slipping through my fingers. The shadows grew closer, and now, there was no escaping them. I could feel them crawling over the bed, circling around me, wrapping me in their suffocating presence. Then, one of them came forward. A face, no, not a face, just a mass of writhing, malformed flesh with empty, glowing eyes. It hovered just inches from my face, and I could feel its breath, cold and foul, brushing against my skin. It didn't speak, it didn't need to. The words it conveyed echoed in my mind, seeping in like poison. Asterisk, you cannot stop. You cannot wake, asterisk. The chill spread through my chest, as though ice were running through my veins. I felt it now, the truth of it all. The pill had opened something. Something that shouldn't have been opened. The shadows weren't just a figment of my imagination, they were real. And they were here because of the pill. My doctor had prescribed it, promising it would help me sleep, but now I realized, he had known. He had known exactly what it would do. The thing's mouth opened, a gaping maw of raw, jagged flesh. It was too wide to be natural, stretching unnaturally across its face. I could see the darkness inside of it, a void that seemed to stretch on forever, and I felt the pull of it, like it was sucking the light out of the room. The whispers were louder now, insistent, demanding. Asterisk, you cannot stop. You must take it again, asterisk. I tried to scream, to fight back, but my body refused to obey. My arms, my legs, my mouth, they were locked, frozen in place. The shadows moved closer, their eyes glistening with hunger, as if they were waiting for something. But what? I tried to focus, tried to remember the pill. The label. The warning. Do not stop taking under any circumstances, it repeated in my mind, over and over, like a chant. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the very air was pressing against me, smothering me. One of the figures moved closer, its shape becoming clearer. It had a face, but no eyes, just hollow, empty sockets. It leaned toward me, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Asterisk, you can't stop. You can't wake up, asterisk. I thought I could feel something shifting, something moving in my body, but it wasn't me. It wasn't my will. It was as if the pill had taken control of me, and now I was its prisoner. The bottle sat on the nightstand, glinting in the faint light. I stared at it, knowing, deep down, that I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop taking it. Not now. I didn't know what would happen if I did. The shadows were closing in, surrounding me now, and I realized, I wasn't just trapped in my own body. I was trapped in something much worse. The darkness had been waiting for me. The pill had invited it in, and now I was theirs. Forever. And there was no escape. The shadows pressed in tighter, their forms growing more distinct with each passing moment. I could feel the weight of them, the heaviness of their presence like a suffocating blanket, wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into their dark grip. The whispering grew louder, more frantic, as if they were becoming impatient. They were waiting for me to do something. But what? I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The pill had taken everything from me, my body, my freedom, my sanity. And with it, the darkness had claimed me. I had opened the door, and now there was no way to close it. You cannot stop, the voice echoed in my head again, but this time, there was a sense of finality to it. You cannot wake up. I felt the cold tendrils of fear crawling up my spine as I realized that this wasn't just a nightmare. This was real. And no matter how hard I fought, no matter how much I screamed inside my own head, I couldn't escape. There was no waking up, no ending this. The shadows began to shift, swirling around me like a storm, their eyes fixed on me with hunger. I felt their cold hands tugging at my soul, pulling me into their endless void. My mind began to fray at the edges, slipping into madness. The whispers were overwhelming now, drowning out all thought. I tried to remember the doctor's face, his calm demeanor as he handed me the prescription. "It will help you sleep," he had said. But this wasn't sleep. This was something else, something far worse. And I had no idea how far it would go. The last thought that crossed my mind before the darkness swallowed me whole was a simple, horrible truth: I had never been meant to wake up. The next morning, my eyes fluttered open. The sun streamed through the window, a warm golden light spilling across the room. I was lying in my bed, just as I had been before. My limbs were heavy, but they moved. I could feel my fingers, my toes. It felt normal. Too normal. I glanced to the nightstand, where the pill bottle still sat. The warning label was still there. The words were clear: "Do not stop taking under any circumstances." I hesitated for only a moment. I could almost feel the shadows watching me from the corners of the room, waiting for me to make the wrong choice. I reached for the bottle, my hand trembling, as the whispers from the night before echoed in my mind, calling me back to the darkness. I didn't know what would happen if I stopped. But I knew one thing for sure: there was no going back now. With a shaky breath, I swallowed the next pill. The shadows were waiting, and I had to keep taking it. I had no choice. Not anymore. I had always been a person who took health seriously, regularly going for checkups. When my doctor suggested a blood test to rule out anything serious, I thought little of it. Routine. No big deal. Just the usual. The nurse, a woman I'd never met before, greeted me with a professional smile as she guided me into the examination room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their cold hum filling the quiet air. She asked the usual questions about my health, and I told her I felt a bit more tired than usual, but nothing alarming. She didn't seem concerned. "Just a quick checkup," she assured me. She tied the rubber tourniquet around my upper arm with a practiced hand, her fingers soft but firm as she prepared the needle. I barely flinched as she slid it into my vein. A slight pinch, and I was already turning my head to avoid watching. Blood tests were nothing new for me. I glanced at the clock on the wall, counting the seconds, the steady rhythm of my pulse calming me. But then, I noticed something strange. The vial, the one she had been filling with my blood, seemed to move oddly. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but no, there it was, a thick, black substance pooling inside the small glass. The liquid wasn't just dark, it was shifting, writhing. It looked like something alive. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't blood. The nurse froze. Her fingers gripped the vial, her eyes widening in disbelief. "What? What is that?" she murmured, her voice low, barely a whisper. She took an instinctive step back, her face pale. I tried to pull my arm away, but something felt wrong. My hand was shaking, my pulse racing. The pain in my arm was gone, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that had settled deep in my chest. Before I could speak, the vial slipped from her fingers. It shattered on the floor, the black liquid splashing across the tile with a sickening sound. It wasn't blood. It was something else. Something much worse. The nurse took another step back, her breath quickening, her gaze locked on the mess. "No," she whispered, her eyes flicking to me in panic. "This isn't right." I could barely process what was happening, but that feeling, that something, was growing inside me, pooling in my stomach like a stone. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the mess of black liquid on the floor. It didn't seem to want to stop moving. It slithered, like worms, twisting in impossible patterns. Suddenly, the door to the room burst open, the loud bang snapping me out of my frozen state. The doctor entered, his features set in a rigid expression. He glanced quickly at the nurse, then the floor, and then to me. Without missing a beat, he slammed the door shut behind him, his eyes already scanning the room with a sense of urgency. "What happened?" the nurse managed to croak, her voice trembling. The doctor didn't respond right away. He walked to the sink and washed his hands quickly, his movements deliberate and practiced. His eyes stayed focused, avoiding mine as if he was already anticipating something. He wasn't surprised. He was prepared. After a long, tense silence, he turned, and with one last look at the shattered vial, he locked eyes with me. He didn't speak at first, his expression unreadable, his lips pressed into a thin line. Then, finally, he exhaled, and his voice, when it came, was cold and detached. "We need to talk." I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat, trapped by a knot of fear. What was happening? What had I just seen? The nurse opened her mouth to protest, but the doctor silenced her with a sharp look. "Get out. Now." Her eyes flicked between him and me, her face pale with uncertainty. She hesitated, but the doctor's stare left no room for argument. Slowly, she backed out of the room, leaving me alone with him. As the door clicked shut behind her, I turned to the doctor, my voice shaky. "What is happening? What was in that vial?" My mind raced, but it felt like I was walking through thick fog, each thought distant, disconnected. The doctor walked to the counter, his hands never trembling as he grabbed a stack of papers and slid them toward me. The top paper was a medical report, but the words on it made no sense. They were a jumble of phrases, too complex to understand, but there was one thing that stood out to me, a name, Vera's helix. He didn't let me linger on it for long. "It's a parasite," he said, his voice flat. "One we've been studying for a while now. We didn't know how it would affect the body, but this wasn't supposed to happen so quickly." "A parasite?" I whispered, my voice barely audible as I tried to make sense of what he was saying. "What do you mean?" The doctor sighed, sitting down across from me, his face drawn with a grim expression. "Vera's helix is an engineered organism. I thought it was a breakthrough, a way to improve the body's immune system. But it did more than that. Much more." I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak beneath me. "You mean I've been infected? That thing in the vial, it's inside me?" I stared at him, my pulse thumping in my ears. He nodded, his face devoid of emotion. "It's already begun to take root. The symptoms will start slow, but you'll notice them soon enough: fatigue, dizziness, confusion, and then, things will escalate." His voice faltered for a moment before he continued. "This parasite feeds on your blood. It's not like anything we've encountered. It changes the way your body works." I felt the room spin. I wanted to scream, to run, to break down, but instead, all I could do was sit there in stunned silence. "But why? Why didn't you warn me?" I choked out. "Why would you put this in people?" He didn't look at me. "We didn't know it would go this far. We thought it would enhance human capability, improve health, eliminate diseases." He trailed off, his eyes flicking to the shattered vial on the floor, then back to me. "But it's evolving faster than we expected. And now it's taking control." I was dizzy, my vision swimming. What do I do? How do I stop this? The doctor hesitated before answering, his gaze heavy with something I couldn't place. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. There's nothing you can do. Not yet. His words hung in the air, suffocating me. The room felt colder now, like the walls were closing in on me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My mind raced, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to break free from my chest. The doctor's words echoed in my ears, nothing you can do, and I felt a terror more suffocating than anything I had ever known. I looked at the shattered vial on the floor, the black liquid still writhing as though it had a life of its own, its unnatural movement a stark reminder of what was inside me. I could feel something stirring beneath my skin, something growing, spreading, like a dark, creeping fog slowly swallowing everything in its path. The doctor's face was unreadable now. He wasn't looking at me with sympathy or even fear. No, it was something else. Something I couldn't place, perhaps guilt, perhaps resolve, but whatever it was, it made my stomach twist even more. "I'm sorry," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, but I could hear the weight of the words behind them. "You're not the first to be affected. But you'll be the last." I didn't understand. My mind couldn't process what he was saying. The last? The thought flitted through my head like a fleeting shadow, but I couldn't hold on to it long enough to grasp its meaning. I was too consumed by the feeling of something crawling beneath my skin, by the fear of what I had become. "What are you going to do to me?" I whispered, my throat dry, my voice breaking. For the first time, the doctor's eyes softened, just slightly. But the look he gave me wasn't one of comfort. It was one of regret. "I'm going to do everything I can to stop it, but I'm afraid it's already too late." The silence between us grew, heavy and oppressive. My mind raced as I tried to understand the implications of his words, but there was no escaping the truth. There was no cure. There was no way to stop the parasite now. I had become part of something much larger, much darker. I tried to rise from my seat, to run, to escape the fate that seemed inevitable, but my body refused to obey. My legs buckled beneath me, and I collapsed back into the chair, my head spinning. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the doctor's voice cut through the silence again. "You're not alone in this. There are others, but you have something they didn't." I looked up at him, confusion and terror etched into my face. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied me intently. "You're the first to truly wake up to what's happening. The others are unaware. But you can feel it. You're connected to it. And that might just be the key." I tried to understand, but it was all too much. I could feel the darkness growing inside me, feel it twisting and changing me in ways I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't just in my blood anymore, it was in my mind, in my soul. I was no longer in control. And as the doctor turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the cold, sterile room, I couldn't shake the thought that had lodged itself deep in my mind. What if this was only the beginning? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the darkness settle in, and the last shred of hope I had clung to slipped away, swallowed by the relentless force of what I had become. I had always hated eye exams. The sterile, fluorescent-lit rooms, the cold, mechanical instruments, and the constant pressure to follow orders and just relax. I could never seem to shake the sense that something was off. But this was a new optometrist, Dr. Garvey, recommended by a friend who swore he was the best. So, against my better judgment, I walked into his office, hoping to finally get it over with. He was pleasant enough, with soft features and a reassuring smile. His office was spotless, too clean for comfort, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. I sat in the chair as directed, my hands clutched tightly in my lap, and glanced around at the cluttered shelves of medical charts and framed certificates. The usual. The same. But then, something shifted. It wasn't just the exam, it was his manner. Dr. Garvey was different. He was too calm, too quiet. The way he looked at me, just a touch too intense, made my skin prickle. I shrugged it off at first. It had been a long day. But as he prepared the equipment, something gnawed at me. Something felt wrong. "I'm going to do a thorough exam today," he said, his voice smooth like polished stone. "We'll get a better understanding of your vision, I promise." I nodded, trying to settle my nerves. He was probably just a perfectionist, right? Maybe he was one of those doctors who took their work a little too seriously, which, honestly, wasn't a bad thing. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But then he pressed something strange to my face. It was cold, an old device I didn't recognize. I blinked rapidly as he adjusted the settings. His eyes didn't leave me as he worked, studying me with such a focused intensity it felt as though he were peering right into my mind. "Just a moment," he said, his voice flat, almost too measured. His hands moved slowly as he fiddled with the device, clicking switches and adjusting lenses. A soft mechanical hum filled the room, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt heavier, thicker, almost like it was pressing down on me. I felt my chest tighten, the faintest pang of unease settling deep into my bones. The sterile smell of the room now felt suffocating, and I shifted in the chair, trying to relieve the mounting discomfort. My breathing grew shallow as I prepared for the usual routine of eye charts and lenses. But Dr. Garvey's next words stopped me cold. "Open your eyes, please. I need you to focus." I complied, but as soon as I did, everything changed. The blinding light from the exam lamp flickered overhead. The sterile room, white, clinical, and cold, vanished in an instant. I blinked, trying to adjust, but the world around me was gone. I wasn't in Dr. Garvey's office anymore. I wasn't anywhere familiar. Instead, I found myself suspended in an endless void, surrounded by a darkness so profound it swallowed any trace of light. My eyes darted wildly in every direction, but there was nothing but an oppressive, suffocating blackness stretching endlessly in every direction. My throat tightened as panic clawed at my chest. And then I saw them. Eyes. Countless, endless eyes. At first, they were far away, blinking, shifting in the vast expanse of the dark. But soon, they began to draw nearer. Slowly at first, then faster, until the space around me seemed to fill with them. They hovered in the darkness, gleaming orbs with glistening black pupils that gleamed like they were alive. Some were wide open, others half closed, but all of them watched me. All of them. I felt their gaze, cold and invasive, crawling over every inch of me. They didn't blink. They didn't look away. They just watched. I tried to move, to look away, but I couldn't. I was frozen. Paralyzed. And the longer I stayed still, the more their presence filled the air, pressing down on me, suffocating me, until I could hear nothing but the pounding of my own heart, faster and faster. And then, as if from nowhere, I heard the voice. It was soft at first, barely a whisper. But the voice, it wasn't Dr. Garvey's. It was colder. More distant. It seeped into my mind like a shadow. "Now, tell me, which is clearer, this, or this?" I could barely comprehend the words, my mind struggling to make sense of them. The eyes around me shifted, some of them narrowing as if they were waiting for my answer. But I couldn't see anything. There was nothing to compare. Nothing had changed. The eyes just watched, and I was suffocating in their stare. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The voice came again, a little louder this time. More demanding. You must choose. Which is clearer? This, or this? I could feel something inside me snap. My breath came in ragged gasps, my chest constricting as the weight of the question, of the eyes, pressured me from all sides. What was he asking? What did he want from me? I couldn't see anything but these endless, unblinking eyes staring at me, suffocating me, crawling under my skin. But then the pressure around my skull tightened, as if the device that had once been pressed to my face was now embedded deep inside me, digging into my thoughts. Blink, the voice seemed to whisper, a command now, cold and unyielding. I blinked. The eyes all around me closed for just a split second, then snapped open, and the darkness seemed to twist and shift. I felt something cold and wet brush against my cheek, and I swore I heard a low, guttural noise, a rumble that seemed to shake the very fabric of this nightmare. The eyes began to close and open faster, as though they were feeding off my fear. The more I tried to breathe, the more impossible it became. Which is clearer? The voice was everywhere now, echoing in my mind, in my bones, like a scream I couldn't escape. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout, to tell him I didn't understand, but all I could do was stand frozen in the endless dark, surrounded by the eyes. They pressed closer, their pupils widening in anticipation, as if waiting for my answer. They watched me, and the weight of their gaze grew unbearable. Tell me. The voice was cold now. Which is clearer? I could feel it then. The shift in the air. The space around me, filled with eyes and oppressive darkness, had suddenly changed. There was something different about the eyes now. Something darker. And I realized with a sickening jolt that they were not just watching me. They were judging me. Then, with an awful sense of inevitability, I felt the darkness pulse around me, and the void began to grow tighter, closing in, consuming me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The pressure around my skull intensified, pulling me further into the abyss. I blinked again. And the room, his office came crashing back into focus. The bright white lights, the faint smell of antiseptic, the cold chair beneath me. But something was wrong. Everything felt off. Dr. Garvey stood in front of me, smiling that same calm, unnerving smile. He hadn't moved. He hadn't even blinked. Well, he asked, his voice soft, almost too casual. Which is clearer? I stared at him, heart racing, unsure if I had really returned to the world I knew. The dark eyes still burned at the back of my mind, and I realized with a sudden, horrifying clarity that they had never truly gone away. I don't know, I whispered, my voice hoarse. Dr. Garvey's smile never wavered. Perhaps we'll try again next time. And deep inside, I knew, with a shiver running down my spine, that next time would come. There would always be a next time. And next time, I would have to choose. I blinked rapidly, trying to shake the suffocating grip of the nightmare from my mind. But as I looked around the room, it felt wrong. Too clean. Too bright. Dr. Garvey's eyes were fixed on me with that unnervingly patient smile. There was no warmth, no reassurance, only an unsettling calm that seemed to stretch into eternity. The walls of the office seemed too white, the light too harsh. It felt as though the room was closing in on me, just like the darkness had done moments before, only this time I wasn't sure if the walls were real at all. I stood up from the chair, my legs shaky beneath me. I had to get out. I needed to leave. I forced myself to move, the sound of my heartbeat thundering in my ears. My fingers gripped the armrests of the chair, and for a moment, I thought I might fall, but I steadied myself and took a hesitant step back. Dr. Garvey didn't say anything as I backed toward the door. His smile remained, a mask of calm that hid something darker beneath. Something watching. I reached for the door handle, but then I heard his voice again, low, almost a whisper, but it stopped me cold. "Remember, next time. The choice is yours." I froze. The words clawed at my mind, echoing in the emptiness of the room. I had to get out, but the air felt thick, as though every inch of space was suffused with an invisible weight. I jerked the door open and rushed through, almost stumbling into the hallway. The office door slammed shut behind me, and I stood there, panting in the quiet corridor, trembling. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, casting long, sickly shadows on the floor. I looked down at my shaking hands, still feeling the remnants of that terrible weight, the sensation of countless eyes watching me, waiting. But when I glanced back toward the door, something strange caught my eye. A faint reflection in the glass window beside the door, a fleeting glimpse of a face I didn't recognize. It was me, yes, but something about it was wrong. The eyes in the reflection were wide, unblinking, watching. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that those eyes were not my own. They were his. Dr. Garvey's eyes. I turned away quickly, my heart racing, as the fear deepened inside me. Had I really left? Was I safe? I ran, desperate to escape. But as I reached the stairwell, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was following me. That same cold, pricking sensation crawled up my spine. I tried not to look back. I couldn't afford to. But I knew, deep down, that I hadn't escaped. I hadn't really left. Because the next time I went back for an exam, if there even was a next time, I would have to choose. And the eyes would be waiting. I've always hated doctors' offices, the sterile smell, the white walls, the silence that fills the air with an uncomfortable pressure. But today was different. I wasn't just anxious. I felt strange, as though something had shifted in the very fabric of reality. I couldn't pinpoint when it started, but when the nurse called my name, Lena Thompson *, it felt as if I had already been here before. My heartbeat quickened, and I wondered if I was imagining it. It wasn't just the disquiet in the air. It was the odd sense that something was wrong, a feeling that seemed to cling to me, tightening with each step I took down the hall. The fluorescent lights above buzzed, their low hum vibrating through the walls and floor. Everything looked so normal, the bland carpet, the pale blue curtains, the blank faces in the waiting room, but the feeling wouldn't go away. A knot settled in my stomach. Maybe I was just stressed. Work had been overwhelming lately, and I had skipped the last few checkups. But I couldn't shake the dread crawling up my spine. The nurse's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. "Lena Thompson." I looked up, my eyes locking with hers. She had an air of professionalism, but her smile seemed forced, as if it was something she practiced rather than felt. "Right this way," she said, leading me through the narrow hallway of the clinic. I followed her down the corridor, feeling the strange weight of the situation pressing on me. I couldn't remember scheduling this appointment, nor could I recall any health concerns I had. Maybe I had made it in a daze. Maybe it had been a mistake. But here I was. We reached the door labeled Exam Room 3, and she opened it for me. The smell of antiseptic flooded my senses, and I stepped inside. The exam table was covered in the usual thin white paper, crinkling as I sat down. I felt the coolness of the surface beneath me, a slight shiver running through my body. The room was empty, and I waited. The nurse left, closing the door softly behind her. I could hear her footsteps fading down the hall, and the quietness enveloped me. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums, the kind that made everything feel too still. I stared at the walls, trying to focus. They were a pale greenish-white, generic, as if they'd been painted in a rush. The light flickered, casting odd shadows on the ceiling. My mind felt foggy, disconnected, like I wasn't really here at all. I traced my fingers along the edge of the table, my thoughts spinning in a blur. The door opened, and I glanced up to see the doctor walking in. He was tall, with a tired face, his features sharp and lined. His white coat was immaculate, and he held a clipboard in his hands. He gave me a polite smile, but there was something in his eyes that felt wrong. "Lena Thompson." His voice was steady, but his eyes flitted nervously from the clipboard to me and back again. I nodded, feeling an odd sense of déjà vu. "That's me." His face tightened for a moment, his gaze locking onto mine in a way that made my stomach drop. He took a step forward, his eyes wide, his lips pressed into a thin line. "That's impossible," he murmured under his breath, staring at the clipboard as though it had suddenly sprouted legs and was running away from him. I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm right here. I'm fine." He didn't respond right away. He flipped the paper over, his fingers trembling slightly. The paper rustled as he turned it around to face me. It was a death certificate, my death certificate. The words seemed to swim before my eyes, the letters blurring together, but there was no mistaking it. Asterisk Lena Thompson, cause of death, cardiac arrest. Date of death, February 13, 2025, asterisk. I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat. What is this? What's going on? The doctor stared at me in stunned silence. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. His hands shook as he gripped the clipboard tighter. I don't understand," he stammered, glancing at the paper again. "It says here that you died this morning. Cardiac arrest. That can't be right, you're here." I swallowed hard, the room growing colder as his words sank in. "This isn't real." I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat, a dull ringing filling my ears. "You're wrong. I'm alive. I'm right here, in front of you." But he wasn't listening. He was staring at the clipboard like it held all the answers, his fingers trembling more violently now. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, but there was something terrifying about it, something haunted. I pushed myself off the exam table, my legs unsteady as I took a step back. The room spun, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse. I grabbed the back of the chair to steady myself. Asterisk, this isn't happening. This can't be happening, asterisk. You don't understand, the doctor said, his voice rising slightly in panic. This shouldn't be possible. You're dead. No, I said sharply, my voice cracking. No, I'm not dead. I'm standing right here. But the doctor wasn't looking at me anymore. His eyes had darted to something else, his mouth opening, then closing again, as if he were trying to form words that wouldn't come. He looked past me, his face drawn and pale. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. The nurse was standing in the doorway now. Her face was blank, her eyes distant. I'm fine, I whispered. My voice was barely audible, but I had to say it again. I'm fine. She stepped forward slowly, her footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't looking at anything at all. Her face was an empty mask, her expression frozen. Everything about this moment felt wrong. The air had thickened, becoming heavier, as if the room were closing in on me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I took a step backward, only to bump into the cold metal edge of the exam table. The ground beneath me felt unsteady, like I might collapse at any second. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening thud. The nurse didn't move, and the doctor was still staring at me, his face pale and wide-eyed. "I don't know how this is possible," the doctor whispered, almost to himself. "You can't be here. You're dead." The room seemed to close in tighter, the air growing suffocating, my breaths coming in shallow gasps. My mind reeled. What was happening? How could this be real? How could I be standing here, alive, when it said I was dead? A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I suddenly felt something darker in the air. A presence. Something was wrong. "Please," I gasped, my voice strained, "please just tell me what's going on." But the doctor didn't respond. Instead, his eyes were focused on something just behind me. I spun around, and there it was, on the floor, right behind me, a crumpled piece of paper. The death certificate, still in his hand, fluttered to the floor, and I saw it clearly. The date, the cause, everything about it was undeniable. I backed away, my body trembling. My heart raced faster, each beat a hammer against my chest. The nurse remained motionless, her gaze unblinking, her hands at her sides. Something is wrong. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the floor, the world spinning around me. My thoughts blurred, panic creeping in from all sides. And then, nothing. The darkness swallowed me. I wake up. But not in the exam room. Not in the sterile, cold space of the clinic. I'm lying in a different place, on a cold, metal slab, under harsh fluorescent lights. My limbs are stiff, my body cold. I can't move, can't scream. The smell of formaldehyde and decay lingers in the air. I hear footsteps in the distance, soft and deliberate, growing closer. My heart skips. I can't see who it is, but I know I'm not alone. The silence is broken only by the shuffle of someone moving closer to my body, their breath shallow and quick. The doctor's face, pale and wide-eyed, appears before me in the dim light. He stares down at me, the same horror in his eyes. And then, I realize, I'm not the only one who's trapped here, The wrong patient, indeed. The footsteps grow louder, closer. My breath catches in my throat as the figure leans over me. I try to scream, but no sound escapes my lips. I try to move, but my body remains paralyzed, cold, and unresponsive. It's as if I'm no longer in control of anything. The figure above me is blurry, its features indistinct in the dim light, but I feel it. The weight of it. A presence, like the darkness itself, is reaching for me, pulling me deeper into something that feels wrong in ways I can't comprehend. The air is thick, suffocating. I can't tell where I end and the room begins. I'm lost. A chill runs through me, though I can't feel my skin. And then, a voice. A whisper. "You shouldn't have come." I don't recognize the voice, but it sounds familiar, as if it's been echoing in the back of my mind for years. My heart stutters. Who are you? My voice is a rasp, strained, but I'm not even sure it's mine. It feels so distant. So far away. The figure bends down, its face coming into clearer view, but I can't make out the details. It's as if my eyes refuse to focus, unwilling to acknowledge what's before me. I feel a cold, unnatural force pressing in on me, like I'm sinking, drowning. "You've been here before," the voice whispers again. "You just didn't know it yet." A shudder runs through my body. I feel the weight of those words in the pit of my stomach. My mind races, trying to piece together something, anything, to explain this nightmare. The doctor's face flashes in my mind, his terrified expression, the nurse's blank stare, the death certificate. The realization hits me with bone-crushing force. I'm trapped in a loop. A place where death isn't an end, but a beginning. And the doctor was right. I am dead. But the worst part? I never left. I never escaped. I never even woke up. The figure leans closer still, and its cold breath grazes my face. Its mouth moves, but no words come. The silence is louder than any scream. I try to move, to do anything, but I'm frozen. I feel the weight of eternity pressing down on me, knowing I'll never be free. And then, the world goes dark again. I don't know how long it lasts. Time doesn't exist here, in this place between life and death. All I know is that when the darkness finally lifts, I'm still here. Staring into the eyes of my own fate. The wrong patient, forever. Hospitals have always unnerved me. There's something about their sterile halls, the artificial brightness, and the faint, lingering scent of antiseptic that makes my skin crawl. Yet, I never thought a simple visit for an X-ray would become the most horrifying experience of my life. I never liked hospitals. The antiseptic smell, the fluorescent lights that hum just a little too loudly, the way everything feels too clean, like they're trying to scrub away something you can't see. But my doctor insisted. Just a quick X-ray. Nothing serious. Probably just a pulled muscle, maybe a small fracture. "We'll check, just to be sure," she said. So I went. The technician was polite but distant, a young guy who barely looked at me as he adjusted the machine. "Just hold still," he said. I did. The machine whirred to life. A low hum, a mechanical click. Then, a scream. Not from me. Not from the technician. From inside the machine. It was shrill, raw, like something being burned alive. The room seemed to vibrate with it. My whole body tensed, and then, movement. Under my skin. The technician gasped. I turned my head just in time to see the color drain from his face. His hand trembled as he stared at the screen. There's something inside you," he whispered. My stomach dropped. I felt it then. A slow, twisting motion just beneath my ribs. Like fingers brushing against my insides. My breath hitched, and instinctively, I pressed my hand to my stomach. Something pushed back. I screamed and stumbled off the X-ray table. The technician recoiled, nearly knocking over the machine. I clawed at my shirt, desperate to see what was happening, but my skin was smooth, unbroken. Still, I could feel it writhing inside me, something foreign, something alive. The technician scrambled for the phone, but before he could dial, the machine let out another sound, a different one this time. Not a scream. A laugh. A dry, rasping chuckle that slithered through the room like a whisper from behind a locked door. I froze. The technician turned to the screen again, his breath shallow. I didn't want to look. But I had to. On the screen, where my ribs should have been, was something else entirely. Rows of teeth. A face. Its eyes snapped open. And then it spoke. "Let me out." The X-ray screen shattered. I felt something tear inside me. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was my reflection in the broken glass. And my mouth wasn't the only one smiling. I woke up in a hospital bed. The room was dim, the only light coming from a monitor that beeped softly beside me. My body ached, every nerve screaming as if I had been torn apart and stitched back together. I wasn't alone. A doctor stood near the foot of my bed, clipboard in hand, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place, pity, fear, or both. He cleared his throat. "You had an episode," he said. "A seizure of some kind. The technician said you collapsed." I tried to sit up, but pain lanced through my chest. I gasped, falling back against the pillows. The doctor hesitated. We took another scan while you were unconscious." He glanced at the monitor, then back at me. "It's clear." I blinked. "Clear." He nodded. "There's nothing there. No fractures, no anomalies. Just your ribs. Everything looks perfectly normal." But I knew better. Beneath the blankets, my hand drifted to my stomach, fingers pressing gently against my skin. Something inside me shifted. And in the quiet hum of the hospital, I swore I heard a whisper. A voice, barely audible, yet impossibly clear. "Not yet." I was discharged a day later, told to rest and return if I experienced any further symptoms. But I knew I wouldn't be coming back. Each night since, I've felt it moving. A slow, deliberate shift, as if it's getting comfortable, waiting. Sometimes, I catch glimpses of my reflection in the mirror, and for a split second, I swear my mouth isn't the only one moving. I don't know what it wants. I don't know when it will come back. But I know one thing for certain. One day, I won't be the one in control anymore.